This question is a two-parter. The first part is whose position is preferable, black's or white's? And the second question is which move should black play? It is black's move in this position. So the first move suggested, and we're given two moves to choose from, is bishop to d6, obviously retreating the bishop and attacking the queen, or pawn to f6. So in this case, we don't need to consider any other moves. The authors have requested us to only consider bishop d6 and pawn to f6. To be honest, I wouldn't have considered pawn to f6 of my own accord, so I'm not entirely sure what the point of pawn to f6 is. I guess the point of pawn to f6 is that it's preventing the knight from hopping into this nice square on f6, which doesn't necessarily appear lethal to me right away, but maybe it is. Maybe we really need to prevent white from jumping into f6 so badly that we need to play the pawn up to do so. It's kind of interesting when you get the two arrows coming together. You get this nice sort of Star of David here on that square. Kind of fun. So I think first off, I just want to get a sort of a general sense of the position. Here we have two pawns. We have pawn d3 and pawn c2 and two pawns for black, so material's equal. But we have an imbalanced structure where black has the two extra pawns on the king side and white has the two extra pawns on the queen side. On the one hand, this means that white's king could be the more exposed at some point, although it doesn't appear to be that exposed at the moment because black's pieces are removed from the action. And on the other hand, white's pawns confer a certain control of the center. So white has more control of the center, and he has these nice pieces established in the center already. And also his bishop has a beautiful diagonal. Instinctively, my answer to the first part of the question, which who has the better position, which position is preferable, is that white should be preferable just because I really love these centralized pieces. But that doesn't necessarily mean that things hold out in terms of tactics and such, but instinctively I think white has a really nice position. So that said, let's consider our two moves. So we have bishop d6. Let's focus on that move first because it's the more forcing move. And after bishop d6, obviously the bishop is threatening our queen here on c5. And we need to retreat that queen, presumably. If we were to play, for instance, knight f6 instead of retreating the queen, which seems to be the only other move that we could try, we would introduce the possibility that black could play a desperado sacrifice with queen takes f6, and that would win because after rook takes f6, black would be able to then take the queen with check. So black would come out a piece ahead there. So after bishop d6 here, we are going to need to retreat the queen. And the first move that I would consider here is queen to c3, which looks pretty tempting. Our queen lines up on this beautiful long diagonal that is weakened, presumably because this bishop was fianchettoed at some point and left the long diagonal to come grab this pawn on g3. Maybe it's going to regret having done that. So we have bishop d6, and then we have queen c3, and things look really, really bad for black instinctively because the knight's just going to come in. But here we can't play pawn to f6 for black, I think, because the pawn would just be loose. We could take it. We might play pawn to f5. Just looks a little crazy, but maybe we can get away with it. Pawn to f5 would add enough control of the f6 square because the rook would no longer be controlling that square. So bishop d6, queen c3, maybe pawn to f5 is possible. But I am noticing here another move to be considered is the bishop running back down the diagonal in the other direction. and it comes back to h2 with check, and then after king takes h2 we have queen takes d5 here. And so we've used this discovery to grab the knight on d5, which was white's most threatening piece. But at the end of that, I would think that I'd like white better because he has the bishop versus knight. It should be a good bishop. He has more pieces, develop more central control. But on the other hand, his king was always open, so maybe that position isn't so bad for black. Maybe after bishop d6, queen c3, bishop h2 check, king take h2, queen take d5, we're doing all right, maybe. The first thing I think to consider here is we definitely need to look at moves of this rook here, because after queen takes d5, the rook moves will allow a discovery from the bishop on the queen, and maybe that's a problem for black. I don't think it should be, though, because anywhere the rook moves, I think we should just be able to sort of skedaddle real quick, queen to d6 check, for instance, and if the rook had gone somewhere threatening, we could take it next move. So we're able to evacuate with tempo, and I don't see any particularly great rook discoveries in this line. Okay, so again, after queen takes d5, there may be one other move at the end of this line to consider here is rook takes f7, just because you got to consider all the crazy moves. And if the king were to take or the rook were to take, you would have the option of moving this rook and giving a discovered check on the queen, and you'd win the queen, which seems like it could be good for white. But I think that after that rook take f7, we can just use our retreat with tempo, and we can come back to d6 check and then take the rook, and I don't see any reason that white would have anything in that particular position. Maybe white could still be better just by playing a quiet move here, just play rook f6, and then maybe we are threatening to move this rook, and we have a bit of a bind, and that might be better for white. So I can't find any concrete evaluation in that line. It looks like it's okay for white, but black is surviving because of bishop b6, queen c3, bishop h2 check. Looks like it kind of holds things together. And before we move on to f6, the other thing to consider here is bishop d6, queen c3. I don't think there's any point in considering other queen moves. They can't be as dangerous as queen c3 here, I think. I don't see anything as dangerous. And we have pawn to f5 at the end of that, so we harass this rook on e4 with that pawn, and we advance the pawn so that we gain control of f6 with the rook that was blocked by the pawn, and we prevent the white rook from controlling from f1, so this should be okay, and that we're preventing knight f6 check. White no longer has the pieces in place to play knight f6 check, and I don't see anything that's a forced win for white, but I just come back to liking this position in general for white, and I think that, you know, black has loosened himself on the king side, and my instinct is that I could probably just play rook to e6 at the end, get out of the way of that pawn that's attacking me, threaten the bishop on d6 maybe. Maybe I'm ready to play knight f6 check again, and I think I just like this position for white. So, in general, I think that white should still be better, but I don't see a forced win for white after bishop b6. So, I think that my answer at this point is that bishop d6 might be the better move, because I don't see a way for white to break things down, and f6 is not a forcing move. And after f6, instinctively, my gut reaction is that black is just loosening his position. So I presume the idea is that f6 is preventing knight f6 check, but it seems like a sort of a desperate way to prevent knight f6 check. You're committing to a weakness already here. So what move would white play after pawn to f6 for black? Maybe we have here rook to e6, maybe queen c4, probably not. Maybe we have knight to e7 check, which looks pretty strong actually. Those are the first things that are coming to my mind. Let's take a quick look at knight e7 check, since that seems sort of natural and forcing. So we have knight e7 check, f6, knight e7 check. I imagine that black has to take. I don't think you could survive a strong knight on e7 check with all the other attacking pieces white has set up. If nothing else, knight takes c6 looks strong. So black should have to take. Knight takes. We don't want to trade queens here, I think. For one thing, that the opposite colored bishop in-game, even with rooks, would offer black drawing chances. And so we have rook takes e7. And after that, we have the rook and the queen sort of in a constellation here. And I don't know, it looks pretty good for white. Possibly even very dangerous with threats of like bishop d5 check followed by queen d4 check could be lethal. Black could try and trade queens here with the queen b6, but white would have a few good options, I think, at least. Could start with bishop d5 check. He's going to be able to at any point trade and capture on b7, and he should be doing well. His rook on the 7th rank, I think, should give him an advantage in that line, even if the queens come off. And a big advantage, possibly a winning advantage. So f6, knight e7 check, knight take, rook take. And the other move to consider here is bishop d6, which forks the queen and the rook, but we have queen d5 check, king over, queen d4 check, and then the queen's coming into g7, and it's just going to be mate. So that looks pretty ruthless to me. So I think my answer, maybe I'm not seeing the best line here, is that f6 can't be the right move, that it's just too loosening, and just the simple knight e7 check would be a strong continuation. Maybe there are better moves, but knight e7 check looks really strong to me. I think that this has to be avoided for black. Bishop d6 doesn't look like it's a forced loss because of queen c3 and bishop h2 check. And I think that black holds on there, although I still think white is preferable. So in summation, I think bishop d6 is the right move, and I think white's position should still be preferable after the move bishop d6. So I was right on parts of this answer, but I did not see everything in this case. The main point here is that f6 loses. On general grounds, I was correct that white is better, which is not surprising. So the first part of the question is right. White is better here, black is walking a narrow tightrope. And I didn't like f6 because of the loosening of the position, but what I didn't see here is that after f6 there's this nice blow, rook take f6, which just wins. I didn't like f6 on general principles, and also because knight e7 check to me also looks strong instinctively, but rook take f6 kind of blows one f6 out of the water, so I didn't see that very nice blow for white. The idea being that if rook captures f6, you have this 3 rook e8 check, and after queen takes, then knight take f6 just wins, which is very nice. But we did select the correct bishop d6 here, and the main point is that queen c3, which we were looking at, doesn't win for white because of bishop h2 check, king take h2, queen take d5, and black is still fighting in this position.